Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to a new episode of the Quill podcast. I am your host, Raul, and I'm glad to have you here with me. And this time we're gonna go more in depth about the life of my grandfather. Last week was sort of a big episode where we talked and we gave you like context where Romania was in the world and where it was heading next. So now let's get into it. As you can see on the map, if you're watching us live or on YouTube, if you're listening, I'm currently showing a map of Romania in 1935 and the Balkans and how everything was shaping during that time. And this is where the story starts because this is where my grandfather John was born, here in Romania. And look at this, it was a really, really big country back then, a really big kingdom. As I told you, even last time, I even got to show you some videos about it. And Romania was doing pretty well. They were allied with France. So, France was quite a power back in the day before World War II. And we kind of got inspired. Even Bucharest was kind of a little Paris of the East European, countries. And it was something truly magnificent. But we're now like 4 years in. My grandfather grew up, with five brothers and brothers and sisters, and in a countryside next to Cluj or Klausenburg here. And back in the day, growing up as a child, it was very difficult. As you can probably imagine, you had no running water, mostly no electricity, if any. And if you were lucky, even if they were next to such a big city as Klausenburg or Cluj, which was the fifth biggest city in Romania back then, as it had like 101,000 people and a few more hundred. I don't really know the exact numbers, but that was Cluj, the city he grew up next to. So, you know, he might have had the chance to see some electricity, but knowing the state of Romania's infrastructure and everything that was built there, Romania was a big like peasant country. They were mainly focused on agriculture and uh, rarely on anything heavy, unless we're talking about heavy industries like oil, or gas, or iron, or aluminium and stuff like that, where Romania had a lot of resources to pull from. So, it was an interesting time to grow up as a little boy. And in the countryside, especially, where they were, no matter the age, after a certain age, you had to either go to school and finish like 4 grades, or go to work the fields and keep clean the house and take care of the animals, feed the animals and stuff like that, which, as you know, is, if you ever had the chance to actually do this and live through this, you know that it ain't easy, especially for children. But you grow up with a certain mentality and a certain uh, physical strength, in my opinion, and endurance, especially in the heat, which, you know, especially these days where we're talking climate change, it's something tragic. Well, yeah, this was the state he was in, but things changed and had to change. You, if you're watching live on or on YouTube, you can see already a few things up there on the browser. And yeah, I prepared stuff ahead because it's really important that we kind of hit the things. So by the way, I forgot to play the music, the very awesome background music that I found. Let's move on. So we last ended in 1939. The 1939 ended with the Soviet Union being expelled from the League of Nations. You know, after the Polish being split between the Nazis and the Soviets, and the gruesome stuff and fucked up stuff started happening. Even on November 8th, 1939, the attempt on Hitler's life, which failed. So with that, we enter the 1940s, the most grave year for Romania, in my opinion, at least what it pretends to, like World War II, because they were in a tough spot, being allies with the French and being basically surrounded by what were the Bulgarians, the Yugoslavian, the Hungarian, Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Russians east, and they were in a really shitty position at the time, with no allies nearby, having Germany and, you know, Italy splitting Europe in two and leaving no escape for Romania on either side. And in the 1940 starts with, you know, Finland signing a peace treaty with the Soviets, but Nazis invading Denmark, Norway, France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. Churchill on May 10th becoming the British Prime Minister. So things were starting to happen in the world, and they were at a very rapid pace. Also in 1939, before we move on, Germany demands a monopoly on Romania's exports, mainly oil, lumber, and grain, you know, agricultural products. Because the Romanians got really panicked in 1939 with the threats of the Soviets to the east, and, you know, the short ration of ammo and power and manpower that Romania had, especially during those days. They expected a bit more, but in exchange for all this, Hitler promised the Romanians, you know, their borders, and to be a bit more lenient and forgive them. This didn't happen, though. From what I understand, Hitler thought that Romania should be punished, and here in the 1940s it all becomes tricky, very tricky. and it goes something like this. After the just a second, because I have a few things here. Right. So after May 10th, where Nazis invade France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, May 15th, Holland surrenders, the Netherlands surrender, Dunkirk happens, Belgium surrenders, and Germans enter Paris on June 14th. France signs over a week later an armistice, so they're basically done. But what does that mean for Romania? As I told you, they entered the war neutral. They were allies though with the French, but there was a treaty between Germany and the Soviets when they made the treaty to split basically Poland into two. When they signed the pact on August 23rd, 1939, they also basically gave them the green light basically to try to take over Bessarabia, or what is today the Republic of Moldova and Transnistria. So here's the fun part. 1940s come along. Romania has no more allies since France was beaten to a pulp, and the British had to retreat in their own little island, and the rest of the Europe was on its knees at the mercy of Hitler and Stalin. That means that after the whole deal with Germany, after the whole thing, something horrible happened. In East, the Soviet Union basically threatens Romania, giving them an ultimatum: give us Bessarabia or we'll come and get it. Here in Romania, they start to get even more panicked, get more afraid, try to find other solutions, to do something. But it doesn't really work out as planned, because this is what happens. Basically, the Germany and Italy, basically Mussolini and Hitler, meet up and to discuss, their plans to how to stand strong against the Soviet Union. And how did they plan this? They planned an Eastern United Front. What did that mean? That meant that they had to kind of unite what were the country of Czechia, Austria, Hungary, Romania, and their half of Polonia into one big front against the Soviets. And to do that and to further punish Romania, they basically forced Romania to give their northern territories, especially Transylvania, over to Hungary. What does that mean? Well, it means that this place was all given to Hungary, which, sucked. And here you can even read, if you're watching live or on YouTube, a little bit more about this. But Romania basically loses in 1940s a bunch of territories after they are forced, and Hungary basically invades Romania to get their territories. The Romanians also lose a huge chunk of what it was Bessarabia and Transnistria to the Soviets, because after the ultimatum, Romania tried to Romania got a second economic deal with Germany, Nazi Germany, and trying to withhold at least what was left in east and south of Romania, and they basically got screwed over there too, with the Soviets actually invading in 1940 and the Bulgarians getting their small chunk here south of the Danube, and here's where the fun gets even more fun basically, because Romania, the big Romanian kingdom has fallen, and the big chunk that it got after the First World War was lost. And here's where the fun basically begins for Romania, so to speak, because a lot of things happen, in that summer, and it was something extraordinary, and it honestly baffles me how it happens and why it happened, or God knows what was in their mind. But basically Romania had no chance either way. Germany was already attacking the Russians here north on the map, north of Romania, and they met somewhere around here, if I remember my history correctly. And having a big chunk of Transylvania under Hungarian rule was something terrifying. But with the loss of these territories, it meant something. It meant that King Carol II had to abdicate, was forced to abdicate after the loss of Transylvania to Hungary. General Ion Antonescu and the Iron Guard, the Romanian Legion, basically took over, and Romania that way joined the Axis, which in my opinion is mind-blowing. Honestly, it is mind-blowing. One of the things that the historians point out often is the fact that Romania had the curse of being actually very wealthy in natural resources, and that meant that they were to play a big part, even if they wanted to be neutral, So dictatorships starts with General Ion Antonescu, which makes a third and final deal with Germany, giving them more stuff in exchange for weapons to fight against the Russians east and try to recover Bessarabia and Transnistria, but of course never getting this small patch back from Bulgaria. Good. So in one summer, Romania lost a third of their land, a third of their population, and here is where it starts, at least the story of my grandfather John, because living in Cluj meant that he lived under Hungarian rule. There are, let me see if I can find the video, because I do know I had one video about this that I might show to you. Let's see if I it's about the Hungarians coming home, well, basically celebrating their win in over Transylvania and getting that territory. Because it's a really interesting thing to watch. Yeah, here it is. I found it for you, luckily. Let me... So if you're watching live or if you're watching on YouTube, I really hope you can watch this, because it's really fascinating to see how they saw. And if you know Hungarian, you're welcome to actually listen and try to translate it. So this is Cluj, this city in the 1940s, after the successful, return of the Hungarian army back to Cluj, where, Cluj being one of the biggest cities, they basically put their signs and emblems and everything, trying to have a parade in a Romanian city, but under Hungarian rule. And I find this to be so fascinating, because you know that these people were basically either forced or they were actually Hungarian. And these are some of the most important landmarks you can see. I could show you even today. I went by this big cathedral, and around here it's truly fascinating to basically jump back 70-80 years into the past and see how the city I grew up and I live in basically developed. And this is just the city center that you're watching here, so of course you're not gonna see a bigger, wider spread. But what's important here is to see how the Hungarian army celebrated their victory after finalizing their grasps over Transylvania and over the whole territory that basically the Nazi Germany and the Italians forced Romania to give up. And it's just very, very interesting, in my opinion, to watch something, because I don't think we would have had this, at least from the Romanian perspective, because we were really shitty at keeping documents and stuff like that, or we don't usually make it public. There was a palace here, one of the few palaces in Cluj, but it's really it's really something to see, and to know that between all these people there were also a bunch of Romanians that had to be scared of what they were seeing here, just like there might be Hungarians that might be scared of some asshole Romanians that are just simply assholes, and you can't excuse them either way. I'm not gonna show you the comments because the comments of course are all horseshit and racist and dumb, and it's pointless, but you know it's it's something to see the difference between the paved streets and how nice it is now, and how it how they're basically walking on mud even with their horses. But yeah, this is what how the Hungarians celebrated after getting Transylvania in their grasps after the whole thing. But it doesn't end here for Romania, because it gets worse. So as stated, Romania under Antonescu. Am I saying that right? Wait. Uh, yeah, I was saying it right. I had a slip of memory for a second. Yeah, so Romania under Antonescu made a third deal where they got weapons and stuff like that. I already mentioned that, but in doing so, they also participated in the Holocaust. They also took part in it, and the xenophobia back then wasn't small, was quite powerful. There are statements from big important Romanian public figures that even today they're spoken highly of, that were like, yeah, drown the Jews in like the Danube or burn them or stuff like that. And it's horrible to know that it was a thing, basically. But with Transylvania under Hungarian rule, and with Romania finally fighting in the war against the Russian, trying to preserve what's left of the territory and the people, a bunch of horrible stuff happens. The first of it, which you saw here on Wikipedia, was the Dorhoi program, where they basically massacred over 50 Jews for a shit reason, because every tragedy of this sort is a shitty tragedy that has a shit motive behind it. But there are three big massacres that also happened in the 1940s with Hungarian rule, and that meant that everyone living in Oradea, Cluj, Dej, Bistrița, Târgu Mureș, everywhere here in Transylvania and Maramuresh was, under basically tyranny and scrutiny and racism and xenophobia and all the worst of the worst things. But that doesn't absolve Romania from their blame, obviously. But on this specific occasion, we're gonna talk about how a child, my grandfather, in having 5 years, and with Hungarians taking over, and the war taking over Romania, basically was left, and was left not just him, his entire family, brothers and sisters and mother were left to their own, as their father basically left them, deserted them, and became a refugee that ran, and no one knew where he ran, why he ran, or where the hell he went, because that's just what happened. And it's tragic to know that you're gonna leave a 5-year-old and a bunch of other children when there's a war going on, and you leave them God knows where, in the middle of bumfuck nowhere, near a big city where you know there's gonna be danger, because that's why you ran away, because you knew the danger was coming. And look at what happened. It was such a cowardly thing on behalf of my great grandfather to do that. It's just a shame to know that my grandfather had to live with the trauma that his father ran, and he didn't hear about him for the rest of his life, and that's simply tragic. But with that, we're speaking of tragic and speaking of getting over the whole mistakes that Ion Antonescu and Carol II already made by getting themselves into the bed with the Axis, because Antonescu really believed in Hitler, that he'll win the war. He really thought that that man would actually hit a home run and win the whole World War. But Romania always makes the worst choices the first time around, or at least in the first half, just like it happened in World War One, and this is just a replay of that. But this time Romania wouldn't get the nice boost that it got last time, where they got this small here thing in Bulgaria, and they didn't get back, Bessarabia and Transnistria. Spoilers. And yeah, here's where the tragedy basically starts. And these are three of the biggest tragedy that happened in Romania that are just known. And because if you could ask people that lived back then and that were here in Transylvania, that were of Romanian ethnicity, they're gonna tell you more horrific stories about people getting beaten, getting just burgled and trashed, and treated like they were less than human, or like they were human shields in the case of war. They didn't care about the lives of Romanians, even though technically they were on the same side of the war. But it just didn't matter. But let's talk about these three big massacres and tell you how they go, and how they figure into the tragedy, and the tragedy that is my grandfather's childhood. There are three basically, and they were like this. One happened on 9th, 13th, 14th of September. Then you had the 26th of November, and here is how they went. Basically, Ferenc Bey was a Hungarian border guard and in their battalion in Debrecen, and they were en route to exterminate locals from Magura, a small community, a larger village, so to speak, which apparently belonged to him. So, they got into the village, and They killed the children that pastured the animals. They fired at locals, and they killed 87 Romanians and 6 Jews without any remorse or any fear of repercussion, and no one knows if they actually got anything. But there was an aftermath, apparently. So, silver lining. The Hungarians, of course, this, I'm reading off Wikipedia, so I'm learning with you. They basically claimed that the killings were in relations with because the Hungarian troops were fired upon, which which is weird in some sense, because yeah. But apparently the claims are not supported by accounts of witnesses. So yeah, it's a tragedy that happened because of assholes that exist even today, and this type of assholery exists for no particular reason. I forgot the music again, but luckily I remembered it just now. Good, let's move on. But after the war, apparently the Cluj People's Tribunal sentenced, in this case and other war crimes, 481 people, out of which 100 to death and 163 to life imprisonment. Most of them were trialed in absentia and never served their sentences. See what I mean? they didn't really get them. They didn't get these assholes. So yeah, sucks. Moving on to the IP massacre that happened a few days later. Yeah, it was another one of those things where the Hungarian army basically made a stop, and then basically shit hit the fan. And it wasn't very nice. But that was just another massacre that happened, and there were between 152 and 158 killed Romanians, confirmed at least, plus another 16 deserters. And it's truly something goddamn horrible, and goddamn really kind of fucked up in some major way. Then there was the Jilava massacre that happened on November 26, 1940, near Bucharest. So right after the earthquake on November 10th that hit Vrancea and that damaged Bucharest, here's the death toll, with Bucharest having some over 140 death and over 86 injured. And you know, it was another tragedy. So Romania, the 1940 year wasn't a good year for Romania. So yeah, this time it was something more fucked up, because even more fucked up because the Romanians were, you know, directly implicated in this, but in a horrible way, where they executed inmates and, you know, shot a lot of people. That it was just such a political fucking move that it just, it's very complicated, and it's very, you know, fucked up that this happened too. But you know, it was something pertaining to the internal power struggle between the guard, the Iron Guard, and Ion Antonescu. So, you know, yeah, this happened too for some reason. So here we are in the 1940s. Hungary is, and the Hungarian army is doing atrocities all over Transylvania, killing people, having them, you know, change their names. One of the things that happened right after Hungary took over Transylvania was the basically Hungarization or Magyarization of Romanian names, in the sense that, for example, they had to change their name to resemble something closer to the Hungarian names. You know, if there were they had a pure Romanian name that made sense only in Romanian, you know, they tried to get it closer by adding syllables or changing syllables to sound more Hungarian, you know, to have a bigger claim at Transylvania even after the war. You know, that was the thought process there, because when you conquer a place, you want to assimilate them and basically force them to assimilate through processes like these, where you change names, where you adapt names, where you know, mix and match, and basically force yourself into their lives and force them into the life you want them to lead, you know. And so Romania had, you know, Transylvania and a bunch of other territories now under someone else's rule, though the stupid irony being that one of those territories were now territories of their own allies, which they still were betrayed by time after time after time, with Hitler basically sucking Romania dry of its resources, its oil, its grains, its everything, because Romania was one of the biggest producers of and sources of crude oil in that time period, you know. So that, and not just that, but I think that helped very much Germany when fighting the war, and resisting after failing to capture the oil reserves of the Russians, which it was a whole thing and deal that basically turned the tide against the Germans and helped the Soviet Union advance and fight back against Germany. Now, here we are in the 1940s, in the middle of the war, with my grandfather John living somewhere near Cluj, near one of the biggest cities that was, taking part of this war that was happening. Having the Russians on east, having the Bulgarians at south, trying to fight back against the Red Army, and having to basically live as a refugee in their own country, just like the first episode hinted at this. Romania made a lot of mistakes in 1939-1940 leading up to this, and there was no helping it. Romania was basically in the middle of the best place that one could wish for. But Romania was weak, and it was between a lion and a bear, and both ate them and consumed what was Romania. So, being a child, being 5 years old, living on the fields with no discernible future ahead, because you might have been killed, raped, kept as a pet, or just starved to death because you don't know any fields when you're 5. You don't know when they're gonna come in and leave you an orphan because your father ran and your mother is just a simple woman. You don't know when you're gonna remain without brothers, sisters, or if you're gonna see tomorrow in any way, shape, or form. These were things he had to deal with at 5 years old. He didn't really have a choice. He went on to do, 3 grades from what I understood. He didn't get to high school actually. So that's what my parents told me about my grandfather. He had 3 classes at the end of the day. Because in the 1940s, after all this tragedy, Romania befell badly. They fell badly and in a very, very bad shape. Economically, they were destroyed. They lost a third of their territories, people, and infrastructure, and, taxes, money, and whatever wealth those 3 territories had, leaving them wounded, basically, betrayed by what they thought would be allies, and alone between a bear and a lion. And they weren't afraid to eat at it, to basically leech off Romania and whatever they had, to massacre people. But this is all so what they deserved. Because Romania had a population of 700,000, over 700,000 Jews. And they weren't safe. Whatever it had befallen Romania, Romania was about to do a lot of nasty things back to the world. And it never recovered. No one ever recovered from what Romania did, and neither did Romania from what it got. Whether it's, losing Transylvania, Transnistria, Bessarabia, or that small patch south of the Danube, where now the Bulgarians reside. But this was only the beginning of the fun, so to speak. The beginning of the mistakes, the tragedies, the horror that has befallen here. It was tragic. It truly was on both sides, but war is war, and we never really recover from it. Ask a veteran, they'll tell you. You don't really recover. Now imagine having no way to cope with any of it, having a population that was 80%, countrysides, was 80% farmers, peasants, plebs, most of them with less than 8 classes, so less than middle school. Most of them never got to high school or, college. There was no certain future for Romania. 18 million people in 1939 suddenly dropped to 12, 1940. Just, 8 months later, it was all gone. Yeah. And my grandfather was literally in the middle of Transylvania, where tragedy after tragedy after massacre was happening. Whether it was two Romanians or two Jews, gypsies, or gay people. This was the story and the beginning of the story of my grandfather's life. Life stricken with poverty, life stricken with a coward father that ran and left 5 children and 1 mother on their own. To leave a 5-year-old on the fields of Cluj, where gunfire, bombs, a horrible army doing horrible things to people was roaming. Instead of staying and defending your patch of land, your family at least, so you can assure that they're safe, but you ran like a coward down south or west. No one knew, no one knows, and I don't think anyone will ever find out where he went. But my grandfather actually lived. He survived 1940. He survived it through all the horror, through the name change, through everything that he'd seen. He survived. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is where we end for today. Thank you for for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I hope you enjoyed this story, and we'll be back next week, same hour, talking about 1942, 1943, 1944, and what was happening in World War II and how people were living in Transylvania under the rule of Hungary, and how the war was shaping Romania and the East. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening. If you're listening on any podcasting platform, I appreciate you. If you like this story, don't forget to leave a like, a share, subscribe and all that. Next time. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.